please post them in the chat, and my colleague Adrian is going to make sure that those questions are asked at the end of both our presentations. There will also, as I said, be opportunity to ask questions in person in the end. Before I start, I just want to sort of give some marketing for our next event. We have another webinar on the 31st of May looking at work time reduction in the public sector, and specifically the public sector in the 4-day work week. So I'm going to share my screen. So today I'm also the first speaker. I'm the chair and the first speaker. My name is Alexandra Arntsen, and I'm a senior lecturer in economics at Nottingham Trent University. The work I'm going to be presenting today is attitudes and preferences to work time in the UK. And what I'm aiming to do with this presentation is identifying how work time is treated amongst the average employees and amongst managers, and how we can use this information when we sort of look at policy making or how to frame the debate going forward. This presentation is based on my PhD thesis. So it has a specific take on work time reduction, which is looking at work time reduction as an environmental tool. So I've paid special attention to how gender and social class plays within this movement of work time reduction. The focus today, as I said, is on attitudes and preferences to work time reduction. Why I focused on this is that a lot of research has shown that when introducing progressive policies, we have the most success rate when they are aligned with the preferences of the group that we're trying to affect. So basically, if we already have people with us, it's going to be easier to introduce a successful sort of move to a shorter work week or shorter working time. So what I'm going to do today is look at workers' attitudes around work time and have a look at a sample of employers and how they engage with the work time reduction debate. I'm only going to present for roughly 10 minutes, so I try to focus this debate around 5 questions. The first question I'm going to look at is the factors that influence the current working hours in UK employees. What are the patterns that we see in the UK employment population or the labour force? While this is the UK, these are fairly generalizable. I've done similar analysis on more European countries, and they are quite generalizable over countries. I have also then asked what are the underlying motivations behind these. So why are these factors? Why does it look this way? But then try to summarize what we can learn from this for the work time reduction debate. And my last 2 questions are the role of managers' attitudes and what we can learn from managers' attitudes when it comes to policy making. I'm not going to talk too much about the method, but for those of you that are interested and want to know more about the underlying technicalities, I have 2 papers that this presentation is based on. And anyone that's interested can just send me an email and I'll forward it to you. So, what do we know about why people work the way they do currently? What we know is that individuals or people who do a lot of household work tend to work shorter paid hours. That makes sense. It's sometimes called the double shift or the triple shift. This is important because we know that the majority of household work is done by women. That means that we at the moment look at the population where part-time work or short-time work is associated with women or with a care burden. And a lot of the times when we look at introducing work time reduction is seen as a gendered issue. We see that people with less conservative attitudes towards household provision, meaning people who have a more modern attitude to family provision, tend to work longer hours. There is the idea that in the UK and many other countries, we're going from a breadwinner model, that is where the male in the household is providing the majority of the wage for the household. We're moving away from that towards an adult worker model where both people in a household are full-time workers. That means that when we look at work time, an individual analysis might not be useful, because even if on average individuals' work time would be reducing, we see that as a household we've had massive increases in working time over the last 10-20 years. We know that people work longer with age, up to a turning point where we have a sort of staged retirement. I'm going to talk a little bit more on how this is important when we're thinking about the 4-day work week versus work time reduction over a lifetime basis. We know that women and ethnic minorities tend to work on average shorter hours. These groups tend to be underemployed to a larger degree. And higher income household is positive related to longer hours, which is expected, especially if we sort of assume that people are paid per hour's work. Taking people's family situation into account is important, that people who live alone tend to work longer hours compared to people who live together with someone. That again goes back to the idea of the move towards an adult worker model, and people who live with children tend to work shorter hours. We see that there is a polarization of working time, where we have a lower underemployed people and lower socioeconomic classes. There is an underemployment. We see that people often then instead take on a second job, which once again increases the hour, but in their main job they tend to have lower hours in socioeconomic classes. So they are time rich and cash poor, where we have increasingly longer hours in higher socioeconomic classes, where we then are time poor but cash rich. I am gonna go a little bit quicker. So what can we do with this type of information? What we've seen this far happening a bit when work time reduction has been introduced as a voluntary policy is that it's been oversubscribed by young female employees who do take it on as a way to cope with caring responsibilities. So it's crucial that when we are discussing work time reduction policies, it's done in a gender sensitive way. So we don't use work time reduction policies to reinforce gender roles. We will also have to address the fact that the UK is experiencing a change in the norms towards an adult worker model. This can be worked in a favor because it means that we can change the full-time norm for everyone rather than for just one person in the household. It might be important to know that in certain debates, a work time reduction over a lifetime might be more welcomed compared to a 4-day work week, especially since a lot of people are experiencing increased financial burdens over certain periods of their life that is associated with creating a family, having children. So I think actually I am going to stop there and not discuss the manager's perspective because I'm running out of time. But knowing what people understanding what influences people work time behavior today is really, really important when we're discussing and framing the work time reduction debate for a wider audience, especially understanding what the barriers and motivators are. So we know that people on average want to work shorter time. We know that they are reluctant to themselves reduce working time because it means an effect. It can mean an effect on income, on career, and on their social status. In the UK, the adult worker model means that a lot of people are scared to go to part-time, as they might put them in a position where they're perceived as lazy. So it's an important sort of factor to take into account when discussing work time reduction as a voluntary approach, or if it's something that should be done on a wider basis. So thank you very much for listening to my part. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Pedro, who's going to talk about the wider economic argument of the work time reduction debate.
Thank you so much, Alex, and I'll keep I'll talk for 15 minutes. Try to keep the schedule. My name is Pedro Gomes. I'm a reader in economics at Birkbeck, University of London. 2 years ago, I published a book called Friday's the New Saturday, making the wider economic arguments for the 4-day week. And last year, I've been invited by the Portuguese government to coordinate their 4-day week pilot that will start in June this year. So let me start with by telling you that the view that a typical or mainstream economist would have about the reduction of the working week or reduction of hours worked. The economists would understand that the benefits in terms of well-being of people with more leisure time, they would be happier, more leisure. But at the same time, if they are not working, they are not contributing with their with labor to the production of goods and services. So it would scale down the economy. And this view that the 4-day working week would be good in terms of well-being, but it would harm the economy, I think it's very present in the analysis, both by the supporters and the opponents of the 4-day week, and hence a lot of the arguments have been we should hours in the day. It's a very large jump from reducing the number of days that you work in a week. So the only really episode in history was the movement from 6 to 5 days. And when you go in the 19th century, we work 6 days a week. And it was in 1908 in the US that the first small firms started adopting the 5-day week as a management practice. They were viewed as kind of quirky firms, a bit eccentric, to try some radical approach to management. Then the movement got a big boost when in 1926, Henry Ford, that's now considered the greatest entrepreneur of the 20th century, adopted in all his US and overseas factories as a management practice, the 5-day working week. And it was a big boost because it showed it turned the 5-day week into a respected management practice, adopted by one of the most productive and leading automobile producers in the US. Now, the 5-day week moved from management practice to the macroeconomy, so to the rest of the economy, through legislation in 1938 with the Fair Labor Standards Act that gave 2 years for firms, not all firms, just large firms doing interstate commerce, to adopt the 40-hour 5-day week. It then expanded through legislation during the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. It expanded to reach all industries and to all workers in the U.S. economy. Now, there's 3 things that that we can learn from this movement from 6 to 5 days. It's that the movement actually starts with companies adopting a shorter work week as a management practice. So understanding and seeing the benefits in terms of productivity, and started adopting. Then only later, you have the movement expansion through legislation, or in other countries through collective agreements, so sectorial collective agreements. So the process is it's not going to be very quick. It took decades from 6 to 5, and I presume that at least 1 decade from 5 to 4. It will take a lot of time. The second point is that the criticisms that we hear today about the 4-day week are exactly the same as the criticisms that you would hear in the 30s about the 5-day week, that it's not practicable in all industries, that it will imply that wages are going to have a big cut, a reduction in the production of goods and services, worries about competitiveness with other countries, that people will be lazy because they will take 1 more day off. The arguments are exactly the same. Now, what's really interesting is not so much what happened before, but what happened after. Is that after, in the US, adopting the 5-day week through legislation, all these criticisms disappeared. So no one wanted to go back. And not just that, you started having the first visionaries of the 4-day week. The most notable one was Vice President Richard Nixon, Republican, in 1956, that said the 4-day week would be coming soon. And this really should give us food for thought. So why did all the criticisms disappear and the first visionaries of a 4-day week started showing up? Because people realized after it was implemented that a 5-day week was a better way to organize the economy in the 20th century. An economy that was very different from the economy in the 19th century. It was an economy of mass production and mass consumption, very much propelled by Henry Ford. And it was more suitable, was better to organize it under a 5-day week. And now, almost 100 years later, since Henry Ford implemented a 5-day week, I think we are at a time where the 4-day week is a better way to organize the economy in the 21st century, an economy that's very different from an economy just 50 years ago. Imagine all the structural changes that happened in the last 50 years in terms of technology we use, the types of jobs that we do, the speed of communication, the management practice, the social demographic characteristics, the length of our lives, or the role of women in the labor market. There's been profound changes, structural changes in the economy. And it's those changes that make the 4-day week a better way to organize. We haven't adjusted the way we work to all these changes. So at the root of the argument is not that we should adopt a 4-day week because we'll all be happier, although that's true. We should adopt a 4-day week because it's a better way to organize economic activity in the 21st century. So I highlight 8 reasons. So I organized the economic arguments for the 4-day week into 8 reasons. I'll just go quickly through them. And one thing you should know about economists, if you already don't know, that we never agree on how the economy works. That's pretty much our trademark. We never agree with each other, and we have different views about the mechanisms or how the economy works or what is important. So I'm going to organize my economic arguments under different political economists that have different views about the economy. So under John Maynard Keynes, reason number 1, because it is possible. The choice that we make as a society about how much we work and enjoy leisure, it's a choice. It's not a law of economics. Reason number 2, because it will fuel the economy through the demand for leisure industries. To consume, we need money, but we also need time. It's in our free time that we feel our needs, and it's in the free time that we go to restaurants, to cinemas, theaters, that we travel. So a lot of these leisure industries, the entertainment, culture, tourism, would get a big boost from a 3-day weekend or having more leisure time. That will have an economic contribution. Under Joseph Schumpeter, he's an Austrian economist that focused on the firms and the entrepreneurs as the drivers, the motors of economic growth. Reason number 3, because it will increase productivity. And this is the argument that's been proven by all the firms adopting the 4-day week as a management practice. They do it because it improves the business, either because workers are more rested or because it fosters the adoption of new processes that increase the productivity per hour. Now, reason number 4 is for me actually the biggest argument for the 4-day week, is that it will unleash the potential of a vast talent pool of innovators. Now, there's a lot of innovation that comes from regular people with day jobs that creates something new in their free time, in their leisure time. Henry Ford worked 6 days a week in a Thomas Edison factory for 3 years, while every night and all of Saturday night, he was building his first car with internal combustion engine. Apple started like that. Nike started like that. Think about the contribution of J.K. Rowling for the British economist, for the British economy. Was it more as a secretary in Amnesty International, or through Harry Potter that she wrote in her spare time? So the time, we can't think about the leisure time as time away from the economy. It's also the time where a lot of companies or a lot of innovation is created. Under Karl Marx, reason number 5, because it will reduce technological unemployment. So technological unemployment is the employment that arises because of the adoption of labor-saving technologies. Self-driving cars will make cab drivers lose their jobs. Throughout history, one of the ways to mitigate technological unemployment was through the reduction of the working day and then the working week. Reason number 6, because it will raise wages and reduce inequality. One view of wages is that they respond to market forces, demand and supply. By increasing the demand for workers, for the leisure industries, or because of higher productivity, raise demand for workers. By reducing the number of hours worked, it reduces supply, so it creates the market pressures for rising wages. Under Frederick von Hayek, it's the father of economic liberalism. Reason number 7, because it will give people more freedom to choose what to do with their time. So
2 minutes, Pedro.
Thank you. So before, people will be freer to choose to work more if they wish to under a 4-day week. For example, moonlighting with a second job or using the gig economy, that they are currently free to work less, because going part-time implies a big reduction in wages and the loss of career promotion opportunities. And finally, improving the economy is not only about making it grow, it's also protecting about the negative risks. And the biggest risk that modern Western economies face is the risk of populist movements. And by sharing the benefits of economic progress with everyone in society, it will help deflate populist movement. And when you have surveys, all the surveys point, it doesn't, the 4-day week doesn't divide. Everyone would want a 4-day week, or most people would want a 4-day week. They are just scared about the economic consequences. So, putting all together, a typical economist will tell you, if people work one less day, there's fewer hours, so you're going to have less output. And they understand this well-being argument that people will be happier. But this well-being argument is very subjective. So some people might like work and saying, no, I don't value that much. So the debate, if you just frame it like this, we are sacrificing the economy because of well-being, and it's going to be very subjective and hence very difficult to make a constructive debate, because people value differently this value of leisure. What I'm saying is that we have other arguments, other mechanisms for which the reduction of the working time are going to improve the economy. And these might be independently very relatively small compared to this first order effect. But what I'm saying is that there are current conditions in the economies today and in our societies today that are amplifying this effect. So the pandemic has changed our perspective about the balance between work and life. In the last 20 years, we have a period of excess savings, what Ben Bernanke called the world savings glut. So it means that for a lot of people, the true constraint on consumption is not income, it's actually time. This is making the aggregate demand argument stronger. We are, compared to 50 years ago, we have now burnout and stress that are hampering productivity. So the productivity argument is stronger now, as it's been demonstrated by companies. A period where ideas are harder to find, some economists call the death of growth. So it makes the innovation argument stronger. The fact that we have robots now and automation is increasing the argument for technological progress and employment. Rising inequality is strengthening the argument for wages. Aging, the seventh argument, and compared to 50 years ago, we really have a very real populist threat, and that's amplifying the eighth argument. So I think we can make a wider economic case. It's recently has been mainly focused on productivity, but I think we have other arguments that call for thinking about the reduction of the working time more as a policy or through collective agreements. And I would stop here.
Thank you very much, Pedro. It's an amazing presentation. So we are now happy to invite any questions that you might have. I've seen that we've had one in the chat. You're welcome to ask questions in the chat, or if you want to ask them in person or share any experiences that you have, then please do raise your hand. So you do that under reactions on the bar at the bottom, where you can raise your hand, and we'll make sure that everyone who wants to gets to speak. So we had a question here for you, Pedro. So Jose asked, you discussed the 5-day work week as a management practice, and you particularly propelled by Fordism. He's curious about your opinion on the role of labor unions in the second stage of the diffusion of the 5-day work week, and sort of commenting that the labor movement were more focused on the workday length rather than the work week. But if you think that's also a necessary condition for the achievement of the 5-day work week.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think the unions were very, very important, as well as political initiatives at this, getting to the third stage or the fourth stage. I do think they didn't play, because when, even before Henry Ford, when firms were doing starting to do a 5-day week, the unions were still worried about getting the 8-hour day for everyone. So they had other worries. They wanted, and it was such a big jump that it wasn't, or at least from what I researched, it was at least at that beginning. Then afterwards, they were very, very important, like they were throughout the history in achieving the reduction in working time. But I think it's very important to acknowledge also that all the reduction in working time, there was always some entrepreneurs, whether it was Robert Owen, the Welsh manufacturer here in the UK, on the achievement of the 8-hour day, or Henry Ford, and they didn't do it for charity. No, they do it because they saw it improved the business. That's why Henry Ford did it. Arguments of productivity, arguments of the demand argument. He said, who's going to buy my cars? Who of my workers is going to buy my cars if they are 6 days in my factories? Why would they need a car? So Henry Ford never did it for as a charity or for sentimentalism. He did it as a business. And I think what this shows is this mutual benefits of a shorter working week in certain situations, and I think they are important now. So it's not just about the well-being of workers. There will be an effect on productivity. That's why firms are doing it. What I think people are not thinking is the wider economic benefits. And also a company is not doing it for the week because they think one of their workers can become the next Henry Ford and create a new company. So a lot of these arguments are what's called externalities. It comes from these are not internalized by the companies. But the answer is yes, unions are very important, and they will be, I think, from now on, to try to get it into either policy, through legislation, or through collective agreements.
Thank you very much, Pedro. And thank you for that question, Jose. I had another question from India. If there's anything in managers' attitudes towards a 4-day work week that's been changed since the pandemic or over the last 10, 20 years. So I did not look specifically at the 4-day work week, but at work time reduction in general. But I think something that is quite noticeable in managers, so what I'm talking about here is not the main sort of owners, not today's versions of Henry Ford, but the sort of mid-level managers who are often seen as the sort of enablers of policies. And it's very clear that the UK has, as many countries, suffered from austerity over a long time. So when you mention work time reductions to a manager, they're associated with things related to austerity. They think about unemployment, they think about laying off people, they associate it with something negative. So I think from the work time reduction debate, if we want to have managers on board, we need to reframe this debate. There's also very large concern amongst managers that if we were to reduce working time, we would have to increase. So that has to do with Pedro's sort of argument that one of the, from an economic viewpoint, arguments around work time reduction is that we would have less employment, because if we spread the work time over, if we reduce the work time per person, we can spread it over a larger amount of people. From a manager perspective, that means you're going to have more people to manage. It's going to be more complex scheduling, more people to try to create a sort of workplace culture. So a lot of managers are worried about the complexity that will be impacted of work time reduction. And then we haven't even gone into the people who have shift workers that they manage. So I think when sort of formulating or when having the work time debate and engaging with employers, there needs to be some kind of addressing how are we going to train our managers to help them to enable this and ensure that a work time reduction is not increasing their workload. Sorry. Yeah.
I don't know if I could jump in now with my experience in Portugal, coordinating the pilots. So I contacted with either the employer associations and many companies. The 90% of the companies, there was a survey, and 90% of managers, they couldn't see any benefit from a 4-day week. That's the majority, and they have this, I call it an accounting view, that if you do reduce by 20% the number of hours, you have to hire 20% more workers. This includes labor costs, and that's kind of their main view. And one of the members of the employer association, he said, if we are going to start thinking about this, we should think about how you divide these costs. And usually in this 3-way, government, workers, and companies, and they say if we have to start thinking about it, we'll think about us bearing 7% of this cost, workers having a 7% wage cut, and the government chipping in 7% with some tax incentive. And it's really their view of the majority. Now, what we argued is that you do have to think about the productivity gains that you do have. And the other firms are showing, and basically that's the emphasis that we put in the pilot, not just the productivity gains, but it's incorporated the reduction in other costs, which is what I don't think they see. Productivity is value added. So it's sales minus intermediate costs. So a lot of the benefits comes from reduction in the absenteeism. So it means that you hire fewer workers, temporary workers to cover shifts, recruitment costs and training, reduction in energy consumption, reduction in the wasted raw materials in factories because you have fewer mistakes. So that's kind of the benefit of these pilots, and is this measuring productivity effect, how much it breaks kind of this accounting reasoning. But that's mainly and this is the majority of companies. That's why I make a distinction between Henry Ford and all the others. And you do have some firms that understand the potential benefits, but the majority, they don't want anything to do with this pilot. They see it as a nuisance. And for those, that's where the kind of legislation or collective agreements would have to, you'll need them eventually. Sorry, you can go ahead. You were
it's very, very, very good. As I said, we also welcome any people who are here to sort of participate, to contribute with their experiences, because at the end of the day, a lot of what we do is more from the academic side. So it's very, very important to hear from practitioners. What's interesting, the final thing that I just wanted to say was that a majority of all the managers don't think that this is something that their own workers want. There is this idea of the manager knows best, this paternalistic view that what workers want is to increase their income and increase their consumption levels. And we know that even there are a sort of substantial minority who is willing to take a work time reduction, even if that includes a cut in pay. But a majority of people would accept a work time reduction, even if that on long term meant a slower progression in their pay increase. So there is from a managerial perspective, because one of the things we'd said was, if work time reduction was to be introduced next year, do you think it would be welcome? And they are all say no, or with one or two exceptions. So it's quite interesting there how there seems to be, and it would be interesting to hear them from unions, how they sort of have this discussion with employers, if they meet similar resistance.
I think if I can jump in, so in unions, there's also that view. So the view that, or some people, knowing what people want, that they prefer wage increases. And you also had that argument in unions saying, because of high inequality and some people are struggling, so they want. So it's very hard to know what you want, because without trying, without even experimenting for the weekend. That's why these pilots are important, just to get. Now, what I think it's an important argument to think about is it's easier to monetize under 4-day week. It's easier to monetize the time off. Meaning, if you do move to a 4-day week, people that do want to transform that time off into more income, it's easier to do than compare what's now trying to turn money into free time. because it's very hard for someone individually, because the economy is coordinated in 5 days. It's very hard for an individual to say moving to part-time individually, because it loses, as you mentioned, all the promotion opportunities. It's also hard for companies to move to a 4-day week, because it will either they close on Friday, which will make it worse, the connection with the rest of the economy, or they'll have to give different people different days off, which is worsens the coordination within the company. So it is, when we are organizing 5 days, it creates this coordination game where it's very hard to deviate. In a 4-day week, it is possible, and we have all the instruments with the gig economy, or with just having a second, which people already do. It's easier to monetize that 5th day. So not everyone is the same. We all have different preferences, but I think it's very. I think it's to me it's very clear that people that would want to work more would be able to work more. Nothing would prevent them if you had a 4-day week, but it's much harder for people now to deviate and get more free time.
We have a question here from Agnieszka. Thank you. She's asking, I wonder what arguments you tested with organization and managers in services such as education and healthcare, where sort of coverage is a more immediately related to number of hours. It's a very, very important question. I've had in one of the projects I'm doing at the moment is working with UK unions on the work time reduction debate, and looking at people within healthcare and school. It provides a harder question. If we're looking at the UK healthcare system, it's already struggling. We already have too little service providers. There's massive queues. So there is still a discussion ongoing there in terms of work time reduction, but it's more over a lifetime basis. At the moment, the healthcare industry in the UK is losing a lot of people, as people tend to retire as early as 55 and younger because of burnout. The workload is massive, so at a certain point in life, people with the highest experience, so people who are what they call specialist doctors, are retiring. So there is the arguments within that industry is that a lifetime work time reduction, enabling people to staying within work longer, and especially staying within specialist role longer, either as practitioners or as educators, or as a mix of the two, is the aim. But it's but at the moment, they're saying it's not possible to ask for a substantial work time reduction, because they would not be able to cover all of the care positions that is needed. But it is an ongoing debate, but they're looking at it on not a 4-day work week basis, but on a sort of different approach. Our next webinar is on the public sector and a 4-day work week. So I'm hoping there are people there can talk a bit longer. Education industry, there is things happening, but it looks different depending if you're looking at what level of education that you are looking for. But there are quite a lot of positive attitudes. But the main discussion there at the moment is that the problem isn't what the contract says, it's the actual workload. So the first problem to be addressed within this sort of educational sphere is not changing the contract from a 37-day week to 30 or 35, but addressing the actual workload. So it's a complicated issue. Yeah, thank you. Pedro.
Can I jump in? So in the pilot in Portugal, we do have a few companies that in which that. So we have a kindergarten, we have a lab that works 7 days. So in there, it's all about how you schedule the shifts, whether it's something that you can optimize. So, but in some cases, you will have to hire more workers. But this hiring more workers it's not an impediment of the productivity increases. So you have to think about the whole company and all the cost structure. So if it's true that you might have to hire more workers to cover the shifts, which imply an increasing spending in the wage bill, you have to think about the other impacts in the reduction of other costs for the company. And these costs could be something like recruitment costs or training costs. It could be errors and mistakes. It could be absenteeism. And so if under a 4-day week, and there are examples of care homes that move to a 4-day week, they have to spend more in hiring more workers. But if they see there's less absenteeism, and it means that you spend less in the recruitment of temporary workers to cover shifts that are paid usually a much higher hourly wage, then you do have gains or savings in other areas. So it's important to have a view of the whole institution and all the synergies that you can get. And I think this is particularly important in the NHS. So I'll just give you two statistics. 12%, 12.5, the equivalent of 12.5% of the wage bill is spent in locum shifts. So these are when a doctor misses can't come to the shift, and you have to hire another doctor, so paying extra time or an agency staff to cover the bills. So this is equivalent to 12.5%. And the other statistic is the same, 12.5% is spent on malpractice claims, legal expenditures and malpractice claims. A lot are happen because someone was not there. They made a mistake because, after 5 days working 12 hours, night shifts, you are more prone to mistakes. That relationship between hours of work and errors, mistakes, or injuries is very well documented in the scientific literature. So the same if doctors, to train the doctor, it's very costly. And if the retention of doctors, they quit after medical school, they quit after being a junior doctor, they quit or leave the country at later stages, means that every doctor becomes much more expensive to train because there's a lot of attrition, a lot of would-be doctors that they leave. So you really have to think about the overall cost structure and where would be the gains of organizing the NHS into a 4-day week. And I do think if doctors are struggling with burnout, it's very intense, and you are telling that you have to work more hours because we don't have enough doctors. What will that mean for the doctors? They would leave. So you are actually amplifying the problem. So I do think we should think about organizing the NHS in a 4-day week. You'd still have locum, shift works, locum shifts for the doctors who would want to work more. But it's really a matter of organization, and I think there would be other benefits. But we really have to think about the whole system when we think about those.
Thank you very much. We have some feedback here from Yvette. She can't put her mic on, but she has written some of the discussion that they have in the Dutch union, FNV. So the problem that they're experiencing is that companies have issues with hiring enough people. They feel that there's already not enough people to do all of the work. How the main issue is in the non-profit sector, where there is a lower pay and a worse quality of labor. This tends to be because of high flexibility rate and availability, or the high flexibility rate and availability which is asked from employees. So at the moment, workers such as in the care sector, a teacher gets a contract of 28 hours. This is what we call underemployed, but they need to be available over 5 days. And I think this is actually one of the arguments within the work time reduction is we need to ensure that if we go towards a work time reduction, what is not happening, that this is happening, as in the case of France, where they won the 35-hour work week, but with worse working conditions. So they had to work, a lot of their other rights disappeared. For example, the rights to work only with a certain number of hours. So this is a really interesting event, and I think that this is a really nice sort of how do you say, move over to what we are going to talk about in our next webinars. Are there any other questions before or any comment?
Alex,
Yes.
Alex, could I just add,
Of course.
edit? So a lot of the companies that are trying the 4-day week, they are doing as an alternative to wage increases. So these are small and medium companies. They cannot compete with large companies in terms of the financial. They don't have, they just can't increase the pay because of finance. They can't compete with large firms. So they use this as an alternative to value the job, precisely because there's been recruitment problems in most markets have been quite tight, and so it's harder to recruit. There's more difficulties retention, and this is an alternative way of valuing the job. And this is actually one of the reasons why companies do sign up to the pilot and are looking at the 4-day week as this alternative to wage increases, an alternative way to value the job, one that also brings this productivity gains.
Thank you very much. So we have shared some resources in the chat. So India has shared that there was a 4-day work week campaign report on the healthcare system in the UK that came out recently. So there's a link there to the Guardian article. There's also a report made by Autonomy on the 4-day work week in schools that came out last year. Thank you everyone for attending our session today. If you're interested in keeping up with the work time reduction debate, we are going to have another which is discussing the public sector in the 4-day work week